Welcome along to the Matchbook Horse Racing Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, joined by Dan Overall and Charlie Poste. I am standing in for Tom Stanley. Rest assured, he'll be back next week, Dan. I believe he's doing a cycle in Paris. That's where we're at this week. So no Dubai or Saudi or Bahrain, but he's taking the week off to cycle in Paris.
The enigmatic Tom Stanley at it again. Tour de France prep, I think it must be. But yeah, you never know where he's going to land. That's one of the interesting things with Tom. He could be anywhere. It wouldn't surprise me next week he's still on his bike doing the show from there. It's the man he is. The man, the myth, the legend.
Charlie, did you bump into him at Aintree actually when you were there last week?
I bumped into him in the hotel. I was staying. I only stayed on the Thursday night, and he was in there. But he was in there with the big dogs from Racing TV, mate. So I didn't really get a lot of his time, to be honest, or his attention. He kind of sort of dismissed me from afar.
That doesn't surprise me at all. But Charlie, you are now amongst the big timers and in the big guns. Hopefully, I'd assume so anyway. So yeah, one day. But I know you've respect for the people. Charlie, maybe not so much Tom, but yeah, really looking forward to running through this Sandown Jumps finale card with Dan and Charlie. Some interesting selections, some interesting races, a lot of subplots with the trainers and jockeys' titles just about intact, or at least there'll be some sort of battle. Before we get going, if you can like and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast, either on YouTube or your podcast feed, do hit that follow button as well too, wherever you're listening, and do check out the Matchbook daily horse racing markets. Invariably, we will be the best price on the odds checker grid. So let's start. We'll start with the featured race at Sandown, the Bet365 Gold Cup, and take a look at the betting that we currently have on Matchbook.com. Kiddies Light, a little bit of a drift from his anti-post price, 5.0. Nick Rocket, 7.5. 30025, 8.0. Same price as the Mios. Amorite, 9.0. Manella Kakuna, 10.0. And bigger prices the rest. Dan, where are you at for this one?
Yeah, I think maybe his price is drifting slightly because of a higher Irish representation than maybe expected. But I often like to find something at a bit of a price for this, but the more I looked at it, the more I just came back to Kitty's Light. He just seems blindingly obvious to me. Obviously, the season has always been about getting him to the Grand National, and he did Connections proud with his effort there. Ran superbly, traded pretty short in running. It looked like after the last he might just have a chance, but in the end, he only finished behind 4 Irish Grade 1 winners. No shame in that whatsoever. And it sounds pretty ludicrous to say, but such is how the race is now run. I don't think he necessarily had such a hard race on that occasion. I think he'll bounce out of it fine, as he often has done in his career as well. His record in this race speaks for itself. Obviously, second 3 years ago in that very controversial finish. Third in this a couple of years ago off the same mark when Hewitt won it. So no real shame in finishing behind him, knowing what he went on to do, and won this comfortably last year as well. I think all conditions are in his favour. And while it's not the most inspired pick, and I like to find something at a bigger price, I just kept coming back to him as the most likely winner.
Yeah, don't force a selection, and maybe sometimes it's the obvious one, Charlie. You've sort of done a bit of best of both worlds here with Kitty's Light and also another selection as well.
Yeah, I took this sort of my own way about it of having two. Yeah, Kitty's Light I think is obvious. Won this off £5 lower last year. We know he's as hard as nails. He backed up so quickly last year with the Scottish National, and then this. And he ran a super race at Aintree, did everyone proud, and I just can't see him not running a massive race. So yeah, he's definitely one for me. And then at a bigger price, something to play, win and place, I'm putting up Canando Quetu. He's had a light campaign, real good ground favouring horse, and I thought he ran super at Aintree behind Cruise Control. Only beat sort of 7.5 lengths. Travelled really strongly through the race and kept galloping after looking to me like he maybe just had a little bit of a blow. We hadn't seen him since the end of October. He should strip a bit fitter for that and just come on for that run. The trip is a bit of an imponderable, this 3 mile 5, but he's a strong traveller that seems to relax well enough in his races, and he'll love the good ground. If he gets the trip, I could still see him travelling really well going the 2 out. Now, whether he'll quite see it out, I'm not sure, but at 17.0, we can play him win and place to find out. But Kitty's like the solid one, but like I say, Canando Quetu at a bigger price.
Canando Quetu 17.0, Kitty's Light for both Dan and Charlie as well. We're in and around the 5.5 mark at the moment. So interesting what that price will go off. I presume it'll hang on to favoritism, but you never know if there's a late plunge for Willie Mullen's second favourite, Nick Rocket. Let's go back in time and go to the novices handicap hurdle at 150 at Sandown, and this is as competitive as you're going to get for a handicap hurdle. Punjabi 8.0 co-favourite with Fiercely Proud. Fire Flyer for Paul Nicholls 9.0, the same price as Secret Squirrel. Steel Alley 11.0. Geezer Rockstar the same price. It's BeGambleAware 13.0. Court in the Act the same price, and bigger the rest. Charlie, back to you.
Yeah, like you say, mate, this is a real interesting contest. Loads of interesting horses, and you're trying to see something that you think is got a little bit in hand and kind of gets in there favourably for me. And I suppose the one counter I'd have with my selection is it'll be interesting to see whether the ground has got enough digging in for us to take his chance. But BeGambleAware, I thought, for the Skelton team, they are probably swimming against the tide now in the trainers' title battle. I think it's probably gone, and feel a bit for Dan. He spent so long trying to beat Paul Nicholls, and I think he's going to beat Paul Nicholls, but Willie Mullins has come in and stole the show. So hopefully he can get at least one on this card. And I thought BeGambleAware was interesting. Winning hurdle debut, winning racecourse debut at Newbury in January. He followed that up with a good second at Lingfield, giving away a lot of weight to Yellow Star at Gary Moore's. And then the last day, again, a talented rival that he went down to by a length in Kamsinas, who, like I say, we know is a talented horse. And I just wondered there if the 2 mile 5 was just far enough for him at this stage of his career, and possibly dropping back to 2 miles on a stiff track might suit him well. I know the mark of 124 is definitely workable. And if it isn't Saturday, he's one for the tracker anyway, because I think he'll make light of this mark next autumn with whichever route the Skelton team decide to take. But yeah, I could see him running a really big race. He travels well. He'll stay the trip well over this trip and track. And at 13.0, he's a win and play selection for me.
Yeah, a bit of money since Dex. Ben Paulin's been one of the trainers of the season, I would say, Dan, and you're sticking with him here.
And not only that, with his novice hurdlers in particular, that he really does have a standout crop. So it'll be interesting to see how they all kick on next year. And Fiercely Proud is his representative here. Obviously, 4-year-old listed bumper winner, really highly tried as a bumper horse, despite only being a 4-year-old. They ran him in the champion bumper and at Aintree, which I think suggests they already thought a fair bit of him as quite a young horse. And he's taken well to hurdling, beat Court in the Act on his hurdling debut, who reopposes here, who is on better terms with my selection, admittedly, but he beat him really comfortably that day in the manner of a horse who may just be a level above. Wonder under a penalty on his next start at Taunton, beating an easy next time out winner. And again, form that's worked out well. And that qualified him for this race. And straight away in the interview, they already were seemingly working back from it. And they were just kind of almost planning a route of where to run him in the interim. He ran in a couple of grade 2s thereafter behind Jericho de Repene and Lump Sum, who were probably two of the standout English novice hurdlers. We probably haven't seen the best of Jericho de Repene yet either. Obviously, there are excuses for his run. A pretty solid level of form. Better ground seems to suit. So while there is rain, I don't think it's going to be too soft for him. He's a real strong travelling type as well. So I think a big field handicap looks like it will suit. But as you guys said, this is a really good race. I can already see myself keeping a few of these on side, maybe into the summer if some continue on, but definitely with next season in mind. I'm already thinking some of these could line up in something like the Silver Trophy at Chepstow. So thinking a few months ahead.
Yeah, horses keep on side. Not just a good race, but a competitive race. Shows what can be done at British National Hunt, especially when a couple of Irish horses are thrown in there as well. The 225 at Sandown, the real whacker. Very tempting I was at 3.5 here, left alone. Hitman 4.0, Gala 5.0, Easy Game 6.5, Al Dancer is 9.0. It's bigger prices the rest. Charlie, we'll go to you on this one. Just initially on the real whacker, it's tempting to try and get him on side, because when he does come good on good ground, I think he'll be hard to beat. But whether that's Saturday's race, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I can see that angle 100%, Dan. Just for me, I just thought he was too chancy. There's been some decent runs. The Hewitt run was okay. The run behind Capodanno at Trials Day was a decent effort, and I can see the angle with the good ground. But I don't know. For me, at 3.5, I just thought he was still short enough with a few question marks from my own point of view. Hitman, I mean, crikey, I don't know. I couldn't be with him at 4.0. Different headgear, still no way. Easy Game was disappointing at Aintree. I know Dan Overall has gone for Al Dancer, so I'll leave the case to be made for him. But I just felt possibly at 11 years of age to see him going and winning a level, well, not a level weight, but a graded contest. I wasn't sure. So I came down with Garlaw. It didn't happen for him last time in the Ryanair. But again, I think he is a better horse on decent ground. 4 wins and a second from his 6 starts on good ground or better. And, the form of his handicap win at Cheltenham on the 27th of January off 150 is solid. He's at the weights, he's a decent player. And the other thing to bear in mind with some of these sort of contests, you'd be wary of backing horses with penalties. But I think by my reckoning, 9 of the last 10 winners have all carried a penalty of some sort in this race. So conceding a bit of weight to your rivals isn't a huge issue in this contest.
Charlie is with Garlaw there at 5.0. And Dan, that was a nice way of Charlie saying you don't really know what you're talking about by picking Al Dancer here.
And he wouldn't be wrong. He definitely wouldn't be the first person to say that as well. So, there seems to be a theme. But it's one of those races where I immediately look to the head of the market and you see the real whacker and you see Hitman, and you really do have to scratch your head because, if you're backing Hitman at that kind of price, then good luck to you. You must love having your heart broken. But he didn't even travel well last time out, which is a concern. He normally at least gives you something. He gave you absolutely nothing last time out. The real whacker, I can see it, but I think he was flattered in the King George by his proximity to Hewick in the end. He was never really in that race. And then I think the Cotswold was a bit of a mess. Easy Game is a horse I love. He's been a brilliant servant, considering he probably doesn't have the class to be at the absolute top level, but he barely raised a gallop last time. He was detached from an early stage, so that put me off. And I just came round to Al Dancer. Obviously, he's getting weight from pretty much all of these. And crucially, he arrives in form, which cannot be said for the overwhelming majority of these. Obviously, won at Chepstow earlier in the season, third in the Old Roan of 154. And he was second in the Coral Trophy at Kempton when we last saw him, which has worked out to be a pretty strong piece of form. Obviously, that was over 3 miles, and he was only headed late on. He made all on that occasion. Just tie late on, and it was a really admirable effort off top weight. I think the slight drop in trip will definitely help him, and Sam Thomas is back in really good form after starting the season in blistering form. Had maybe a bit of a mid-season dip, still a decent strike rate, but all of a sudden his runners have really burst back into life. And knowing how Al Dancer performs after a short break and how Sam Thomas is such a masterful target trainer, I think they probably had this race in mind since that run at Kempton. So I think he'll go from the front, and I think he could take a bit of passing. Admittedly, he is 11 years old, but I'd say that's less of a question mark than some of these have to answer.
Charlie, are you convinced at all?
Hey, I'd never doubt Dan Overall. The other thing I'd chuck into the argument with that, just for people that are taking an interest, riders, Dylan Johnson is someone that I actually do some coaching with. He's a young rider, still claiming 5, so a big moment for him in a Grade 2 on a massive card. But he'd be well up to this now. He's a young man to keep an eye on and keep on side, because I think he's got a bright future. Had a really good year first season with Ollie Murphy this time round, and I think he'll go on to bigger and better things. Whether he could mount a challenge for conditional jockey's title next year, it could be possible if he gets a good start. So good rider, and like I say, excited for him because it's a big moment for him.
Okay, love that. Garlaw 5.0 for Charlie, 9.0 for Dan is Al Dancer. One of my favorite tweets of the National Hunt season was, remember Shishkin for the Demon Chase was around even money 8-11, and the talk was, are you back in our lane? And the tweet was, after the race, layers of Shishkin knew they were a goose, where their only hope was Hitman coming on the outside for a challenge. They knew it was game over from there, and he ended up losing by 4.5 lengths somehow from there. Celebration Chase, 3 o'clock, Sandown. Another debate here. I'll be interested on the guys' thoughts. El Fabiolo, Post-X has gone in about 1.66, 3.25. John Bond, Edwardston 9.0, 34.0 on bigger prices the rest. But to be fair, those 4 outsiders, on their day have potential of maybe running into a place. Dan, you're no bet here. I will come to you though, but we'll start with you, Charlie, on El Fabiolo. The price difference between him and John Bond, it's now currently 166, 325. When does that become a switch for you when you go from El Fabiolo to John Bond? Because it is sort of half tempting me, that 9-4-ish, 3.25 on John Bond.
I completely agree, mate. As in, I must admit, when I was going through this, El Fabiolo was 1.8, and I thought, in all honesty, if you thought he was nigh on unbeatable in the champion chase, which again we saw there that there's no such thing in a jumps race, but if you thought that he was nigh on unbeatable there, then 1.8 is a pretty attractive price, I would have said, if you're into backing shorties, because you felt at the time that he was that much better than John Bond, and he had been through his prep and all the opposition around him. So yeah, the fact that you were getting a shade under even money, 2.0 for this, I thought was attractive. But as you say, there's obviously other people that kind of agree with that, and he is shortening all the while. Now, yeah, if he continues to get shorter than that, then I think John Bond does become interesting, because John Bond looked really good at Aintree. He's also taken a lot of flack for really one performance behind Elixir and Nuts where he did a few things wrong. But other than that, he's a high quality horse still. And it definitely, I think, with these sort of contests becomes price related. And if El Fabiolo gets shorter and shorter and John Bond continues to hold around 3.25, then I do think he becomes of interest, because the one thing I'd say he will do, and maybe he didn't at Cheltenham, was that his jumping is pretty normally rock solid. He won the race last year. Sandown is a jumper's track, and that is the one question mark for El Fabiolo. The fences come quick. Rhythm is hard to find if you don't get going. And if he jumps like he did at Cheltenham, I'd argue Sandown takes even more jumping, so it could be interesting. So, So El Fabiolo now for me at 1.8, but if you continue to shorten up, Dan, then yeah, I would say John Bond becomes interesting.
Yeah, Dan, like what price, same question, like what price would it take for you to go, actually, I will have a bet on this race and it will be John Bond? Is it at 4.0? Does it go further out than that?
No, I think at 4.0, I think he definitely becomes a proposition. I think for El Fabiolo, for me, it would have to be towards the even money kind of level. It's not the kind of race I typically bet in. My one hope really with this race is that it's what the Champion Chase should have been. Obviously, we've seen it was another disappointing Champion Chase this season, in my opinion, in terms of the race where it fell apart with El Fabiolo. Obviously, John Bond didn't show up, so it just became a bit of an afterthought. But this is a proper race. Obviously, Edwardstone in there as well. So it's a really good race. Obviously, John Bond and El Fabiolo is a rivalry that maybe after this season we might see the end of if John Bond goes up in trip, which maybe seems a likely scenario given what he did at Aintree. So this could be potentially the last time they face each other, maybe for some time. So it could be a definitive stamp on that rivalry. And I'm still of the opinion that El Fabiolo is the superior 2-mile chaser. Obviously, some will be concerned about the jumping, and that's been something that's been targeted for a while, and maybe at Cheltenham it just came to pass, but I wouldn't be overly harsh just on one performance. I think we know a peak El Fabiolo is superior to John Bond. I think the market is just favouring that at the minute.
Okay, yeah, so no bet for Dan. At the moment, Charlie's sticking if you can get 1.8 on El Fabiolo. And yeah, look, I'd probably be tempted at John Bond on that price, but we'll see how the market develops over the next 36 hours or so. We will get back to Sandown with the 4:10. Fascinating race there. Should be on ITV, isn't. 205 Leicester is. Charlie, take it away with a selection here, 9.0.
Yeah, I just come down with Magic Memories. Al-Mubhir, it heads the market off at 3.75 for William Haggis, but he won this race last year, but he'd come into that with a prep. I think he ran in the Lincoln prior to this run. Hasn't got that this time round. And so for that reason, I thought he was vulnerable, and I was looking for something at a bigger price. So yeah, Magic Memories for Gary Moore. He ran well in the Spring Mile, finishing 5th on his first start of the season. You'd think he'd come forward for that a little bit. He was bang there a furlong down and just weakened out of it to be 5th, where quite a lot were closing in late in the race. Tom Queally rode him that day. He got put up £1 to 81, and Gary Moore has enlisted a £7 claim at Jack Enright. I think he's only ridden 4 or 5 winners, but I went through a few of his rides recently, and he looks a tidy £7 claimer, and maybe a lad that's got a bright future and might go on this season. So clever from Gary Moore, takes the horse down below, I think, his last winning mark. And he loves soft ground as well. They give him the ground that's soft at Leicester. Draw is fine. So at 9.0, I'm with Magic Memories, win and place.
Okay, 9.0 win and place, Magic Memories. That's the 205 Leicester. The other live ITV race is 245 Haydock, the trustedtrader.com 6 furlong handicap. And another tempting win and place price here, Charlie. I'm liking this.
Yeah, as in again, another crappy race. Early season form on the flat is difficult, especially when the ground is heavy, because you're chancing fitness. Again, we have last year's winner in here, Rainbow Fire. Conditions very different now. I think he won on good ground for Marco Botti, who is in excellent form last season. Not going to have those conditions on Saturday at Haydock. Ground is heavy. So yeah, I came down with Zip for my old boss, Richard Fahey. He's 13.0. Going to back him win and place. He's been running throughout the winter on the all-weather with credit, not doing a whole heap wrong without being able to get his head in front. And then ran a nice race over 6 at Doncaster at the Lincoln meeting behind Nebworth, finishing 4th, beat 3.5 lengths. He's going back up a furlong in trip back to the 7 furlongs, which is his optimum. And he's drawn well. Tyler Hurd's a really good £3 claimer. And the one thing this horse does love on turf is he loves bad conditions. So heavy ground really in his favour. And at 13.0, I thought he was interesting, Dan.
Okay, yeah. Zip 245 at Haydock. Dan, before we move on to any other bets, the flat, Dan, when are you going to get into the flat a bit more and start, putting the homework in? I mean, what do you do for the summer? Summer jumps?
Dan, I've tried. I've genuinely tried. It just doesn't happen. And I can't force it. And to be fair, I quite enjoy having a little summer break. I can kind of relax. And obviously I follow the summer jumps to an extent. Obviously, it's significantly less busy than it is during the autumn and the winter. But yeah, I just take a bit of time off, mate, recharge, come back, call me when it's the Chepstow opening meeting, and we'll talk.
Yeah,
We won't get you to Royal Ascot then, or anything like that, for a day out, Dan.
A day outs now. We're talking, yeah. But don't expect me to come with any. Well, I don't think anyone expects me to come with glistening insight anyway. But definitely don't expect it when you get me to a flat meeting. I'll be all ears, no mouth for a change.
Yeah, I hang out with a number of jumps fans, but we are broadening our horizons to pick up a few flat meetings, Charlie. So any advice on going to those meetings is much appreciated. But I do always wonder what Matt Toombs does during the summer, and his answers
hibernate.
Hibernate.
I mean, surely he's picking through Cheltenham still and finding the stats and trends that we all need for next winter.
He has an article as of yesterday on Matchbook Insights, well worth checking out. I'll actually link it in the description, but basically it's his idea of the changes, or what changes could be, to next year's Cheltenham Festival. So that man is never out of Cheltenham mode. Any other bets time? I'll do the prices here, Dan, because I do want to talk about this race. Impere Pass is favourite, 183 favourite for the 410 at Sandown. Langerdan 4.0, Ballyadam 9.0, Sir Gerhard 11.0. Is it a case, Dan, that you just think this horse is a 2.5 miler and now is his chance to really show it again?
It's pretty much exactly that. I just think that price is far too big relative to Impere Pass. And to a certain extent, I have them in very similar moulds. Obviously, Impere Pass is a few years younger than Sir Gerhard, but obviously both won the Ballymore. And maybe both have just been a bit disappointing ever since, when they both seem to have the world at their feet. And that's harsh on Impere Pass. Obviously, only one season out of novice company and has run well. And obviously won a Grade 1 at Aintree, but he does have his quirks, as does Sir Gerhard. But I think at the 11.0 price of Gerhard I think that's just far too big. When you look at his hurdling form, he's only disappointed twice. One, it was the end of his novice season, where I think he really just had enough. And then it was in this year's Stayers Hurdle, which 3 miles heavy ground is just not what Sir Gerhard wants. He has plenty of pace. He showed that when backing up at 2 miles last time out. I think 2.5 miles of goodish ground is what will see him to best effect. And I just thought the difference in price was far too much, especially when you consider that Impere Pass, obviously a shade of odds on, and he's giving Sir Gerhard £6. I just think the difference is far too big.
As Dan says, 3 miles heavy ground is not what Sir Gerhard wants. As I caught myself nodding my head as I remembered I also backed Sir Gerhard in that race, 3 miles heavy ground at Cheltenham. And for halfway through the race, I thought he was going okay. I'm absolutely deluded. Before we move on from that race, Dan, I think Langerdan is the bet in that race, 4.0. I think he should be closer to Impere Pass in the betting. I accept maybe a small bit of idling or pulling up a little bit in front from Impere Pass, but this track potentially, Langerdan, that could be the one for me. Your thoughts on Langerdan as a betting proposition at 4.0?
Good thing you clarified with betting proposition, otherwise you would have been an unhinged rant about the stay of Langerdan. No, he's an interesting one, because obviously he had been tried at kind of graded level previously and didn't look up to it. And the Aintree, I don't think really anyone massively expected that. I don't think Skelton really expected that. I think his job had been done, but it was a clear career best. Obviously, Bob Ollinger and Impere Pass, 2 high-class horses. Do they put it all in the finish? Probably not. And hey, look, he did nothing wrong. He can continue on that vein. I mean, he's now rated 160. I mean, the handicaps are out of the question. He could be a Stayers Hurdle horse next season, but I can see it. But at the same time, there's just nothing in my heart that wants Langerdan to win.
I mean, lad, you could say that he was the unlucky one at Aintree.
He was, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
I think he's overpriced. I was surprised, not that I expect him to be favourite, but I expect him to be, 3.0, 3.25, closer to Impere Pass. Yeah, I know.
You think whatever happens at this trip, Paul Tannen's he'll have to wait a good bit longer on Impere Pass, because
yeah,
Sandown stiff 2 mile 5.5. Like, he won't be wanting to let him on as early as he did at Aintree, and that there's no way in this world he want to do that. So it's going to be an interesting race to watch as well.
Yeah, and we don't often get that somewhere between 2.5 and 3 mile sort of distance. So yeah, it'll be fascinating. Chepstow Friday, guys. You both have a selection. Charlie, I'll let you go first, and then bring in Dan.
Yeah, Saunton Surf in the 8:15 race that closes the card off for Warren Greatrex. This mare had good form in point-to-point flat races last year, and won one at Maysmore, which is a track over by Gloucester, and then there's a point-to-point trainers bumper at Aintree, and she beat Cadell, who and she beat him really soundly, I think 6 or 7 lengths. Cadell, as we know, ended up with Lucinda Russell, and I think is now rated somewhere in the mid 120s. And the Saunton Surf went to Warren Greatrex they paid a few quid for, I think, about 150 grand. And she's had 3 solid runs in maiden hurdles, placed in a couple of her starts, and I just felt that she opens up off a mark of 106, stepped up to 2.7, back left-handed. I think it was right. It was Wincanton on her last start, and she lugged a bit out to her left, the jockey reported. So going back to Chepstow left-handed should suit well. And I just feel on a line through Cadell and that bumper form, 106 should be workable for her. And Chepstow, the race at Chepstow presents a pretty decent opportunity.
Okay, the Staunton Surf in the 8:15 at Chepstow. That's tomorrow, Friday, if you're listening on the podcast. 6:10 Chepstow Friday, Dan.
I love that we've both gone to Chepstow on Friday. The jumps never dies. I absolutely adore it. So yeah, the 6:10 at Chepstow, handicap chaser with just shy 2.5 miles. I think plenty of these are quite out of form or look like they're having the first run back with a view to a summer campaign. So I think this is a good opportunity for tighten our belts to get back to winning ways. He looked to be a really progressive novice chaser earlier in the season when he bolted up on his chasing debut. It's been a bit difficult for him since. I think the rise in the weights has kind of caught him out, and the company he's been forced into hasn't been ideal. But he ran well in the Grade 2 John Frankham thereafter. Then the Corto Star, he was kind of out of his depth in that regard, but so a few good horses. So I think you can forgive that. And he made a really bad blunder at the first at Cheltenham on Trials Day in a really competitive handicap chase, which just seemed to knock his confidence. Never really got into rhythm thereafter. They gave him a break. They gave him the spin over hurdles when we last saw him, but he's been eased in the weights. This is the easiest race he's competed in since his chasing debut. And if you look at that form from that race and indeed the Grade 2, it makes a mark 134 still look workable. So if he can bounce back to the kind of form we saw earlier in the season, I think he could win this quite convincingly because he did seem to be quite a promising novice chaser earlier on.
Tighten our belts, 6:10 Chepstow Friday. And Matt Toombs has been in touch, Charlie, and he said you're spot on. That's exactly what he'll be doing all summer, looking through Cheltenham trends and stuff. So that's great to hear. And that's what Matt Toombs spent his summer. And you know what? It's all worthwhile when you get to March. But long live the jumps, as Dan Overall would say. Matchbook Zero. Long shot. Check out Matchbook Zero. This is actually a good gateway sort of product between the betting exchange itself and sports books. We are zero margin, 0% commission, and you will definitely be getting the best price on the odds checker grid, given that the Matchbook betting exchange is already by and large the best price in the odds checker grid. So do check that out. They're win only bets. Good fun way of getting involved on the exchange. Charlie, your Matchbook Zero long shot is?
Yeah, be aware, Dan, in the 150 at Sandown.
Yeah, it was a good case, actually. Dan, you have a separate selection here?
Yeah, got off piece slightly. The 445 at Sandown, Glory and Honor. I think he's currently 21.0 on the market, but as you say, you'll get a bigger price than that on Matchbook Zero. But he has form with Aintree winner Cruise Control from earlier in the season when he beat him at Doncaster. Cruise Control was off 125. He's now off 17 pounds higher. Form at Musselburgh was solid thereafter. He's just a really solid, consistent horse on good ground. I mean, a combination of first-time wind up and a little bit of a break on soft ground is an obvious excuse for last time, but you go back prior to that, really consistent, strong traveller, and there's a load of pace angles in this race. So I can see him travelling into it really well. If he's quite well handicapped enough, I'm not sure, because it is a decent calibre of race, but I thought he looked overpriced, and I think you'll get a really good price about him on Matchbook Zero.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be definitely one perfect sort of horse to back on Matchbook Zero. Let's move on to best podcast bets, and I've one here, but I'll let the guys go first. Charlie, 205 Leicester is where you're looking.
Yeah, Magic Memories 205 for me, Dan, please.
Yes, Dan Overall. I was going to say a word there, but shout out to the haters, I guess, with this selection. Charlie Poste, that is.
Yeah, the 225 at Sandown, Al Dancer 9.0. I just think that's overpriced, considering I think he has less to prove than pretty much everything else in the race.
Charlie, like, if that wins, I mean, your name is going to be like you Basically, you're
he gave it like the
you're basically
slightest little
laying.
knock.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
it is
mean, look,
a-
I'll take it on the chin. Fair play
Yeah.
to Dan Overall. I'll be chuffed for Dylan Johnson anyway, so I'll
Yeah,
probably
win-win.
get over it. Yeah.
Win-win. And Dan Overall won't like this as well as most viewers and people on Twitter. That is Langer Dan at 4.0. Forget maybe last race. I already covered that case in the when we covered the race. But I remember that Carl Cup performance and looking at Langer Dan in shock. Even though I thought he would run well and potentially win the Carl Cup, to win it like the way he did surprised me. And you mentioned the Skeletons were surprised the last run. I mean, that he went off 23, 24, 25.0 on the matchup betting exchange. You couldn't give him away on the exchange, and that performance was incredible. And I thought he probably could have won the race if things had gone a little bit differently. So yeah, Langer Dan one more time this season, 4.0. 410 at Sandown. And just before we go, guys, just a question here, and I thought it'd be worth, because it is essentially our last National Hunt podcast of the year. I mentioned there's insights content from Matt Toombs available. There will be Punchestown previews next week, obviously, but that's in Ireland. Rate the national season as a whole. I'll go to you first, Dan. I know I'm sort of throwing this at you, so no need for rating or anything, but your overall thoughts of where we were probably this time last year to where we are now.
I think we end up at the end of the season probably questioning a lot of things and looking at improvements that can be made. And there are plenty. Obviously, the Cheltenham Festival will be looked at in full. I think obviously that's kind of how we generally look at the season. How was Cheltenham is kind of one of the main parameters, and it was a bit disappointing. But then you look outside of it, we're seeing one of the greatest achievements probably in our sport of what William Bullins is doing. Like, I think sometimes you have to accept that as just a tremendous accomplishment. We've seen Dan Skelton really emerge as a title contender in this season, and he's now taken his operation to the next level, obviously, while Paul Nicholls is still the force. Obviously, we've lacked the likes of Constitution Hill, but I think there's so many things you could dig into. But I think we've seen some really good parts of it. Galopin Deschamps, a true champion of our sport. There's plenty of good about jumps racing. I think we focus a lot on the negative, and to a certain extent, rightly so. But I think it's been a good season, but there's definitely things we can improve on, and hopefully we do going into next season.
Yeah, I definitely feel there's more need. Like, look, there was a couple of Cheltenham reviews out there that were bordering disgraceful on how negative they were, remembering that their audience is a horse racing audience predominantly, and that's what we got to remember. But at the same time, you've got to cover these stories. The Willie Mullins thing is interesting, Charlie, because like the law of unintended consequences now. Is Willie going to start targeting UK races at the start of the season? Is that a good thing? It probably isn't overall, but at least it makes the races competitive in the short term. Where are we at with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at it as whether you are just a fan of seeing good horses run, or whether you buy into the Anglo-Irish thing, and that we as British people want British trained horses to dominate. From a personal perspective, look, I get it, and I want to see British trainers front up and compete and be successful, but I just want to see nice horses. And right now, I suppose the unfortunate thing with the sport is the vast majority of them all house within 1 yard, but like that also isn't that bloke's fault. He's got an unbelievable operation. The issue for the other yards is his scouting network and his monopoly on it, whether that's because of the money he has or the personnel that he has involved, is better than everyone else's. Most of these horses that he's winning the big grade ones with aren't on the open market. He's getting them before anyone else has an opportunity. And so that's where he's dominating. And so he's got more money, so he can buy the better ones, and he's getting them before anyone else has a chance. That's the thing that the better minds in the sport, the bigger trainers, are going to have to try and circumnavigate, which isn't going to be easy. So in the short term, Willie Mullins is going to continue to dominate. If he sends the horses over to Britain early in the season, Dan, for me, if they're good horses that are going to make our big races more competitive, I don't see a problem with that, in all honesty. I actually think Sandown on Saturday is going to benefit from it massively. We're seeing some real quality. I mean, El Fabiolo turning up on the last day of the season, it's brilliant, as in things you love to see. And I suppose the Cheltenham needs to improve. There's definite things that need tweaking. And I think they are at a point with the crowds voting with their feet that they're going to have to address certain situations, costing, competitiveness, consumer experience. Having your car towed out when you paid £100 to get in is not good enough, and things like along that. But I didn't know that the one benefit was I thought Aintree was outstanding. I thought we had a brilliant Grand National meeting. The big race was exciting, and the subplot and the supporting races were were fantastically competitive. So I agree with you both. I think we have to try and keep being positive for all that we can recognise there's room for improvement. You muted yourself, mate.
Oh,
Wow.
The master producer, and he can't click a mute button. It's been a long day, has it, mate?
It actually has. It's been a long day.
He's done it to all of us so many times, and now it's happened to him.
Oh, it's beautiful.
This double hosting duties is not for me. Not for me. It was all I was saying was I agree with you guys. Great stuff. And for anyone listening or watching, do let us know your thoughts on the National Hunt season. We'll be keen to hear them either on this YouTube comments or just tweet any of the tweets we put out there at Team Matchbook. My thanks to Charlie Poste and Dan Over. Professional as ever, the guys, less so the host. We will be back, and Tom Stanley will be back, and I'll be back where I belong, behind the screen as Tom Stanley returns with a couple of big podcasts. Actually, Punchestown, we're going to record 1:30 p.m. live, covering Tuesday, Wednesday's card as well as the rest of the week. We've got Dan Overall booked for that, Don McLean, Matt Toombs, heavy hitting team, and we've got our team that is adaptable to anything, like Charlie Poste, for example, and he'll be on the Thursday podcast doing everything, Guineas, Punchestown, you name it, wherever racing is, Charlie Poste will be there. So we will chat to you all next week. Until then, enjoy the weekend's racing and particularly the jumps finale. Bye bye.